This episode is presented to you in the form of an audiobook. The secret to a truly happy life isn't about seeking approval or meeting every expectation. Imagine living free from the weight of others' judgments, no longer desperate for validation. Picture a life where your happiness is entirely your own, untouched, unfazed, and free. It might sound impossible, but this is the key to your peace of mind. Welcome to today's episode. We're diving into a radical perspective on happiness and human nature, drawn from the powerful book, The Courage to be Disliked by Ichiro Kishimi and Fumitake Koga. In this episode, we'll explore why the simple act of giving up the need for others' approval could completely transform your life. We all have problems, doubts, frustrations, moments of anxiety, but at the core of these struggles lies one simple truth. We care too much about what others think of us. Every issue we face in life, from workplace stress to relationship problems, ultimately comes down to this. It's a universal challenge, the fear of being disliked. The question, however, is not if you care about others' opinions, but how much you let it control your decisions, your happiness, your entire existence. For many of us, this pursuit of approval has become a prison. We measure our worth by how others perceive us. We spend endless energy crafting our persona, carefully molding ourselves into what we think others will like. But in this game of constantly seeking validation, we end up losing ourselves. And in the process, we lose our happiness. The reality is that the more you chase external validation, the further you get from true contentment. The authors argue that the solution isn't about trying harder to be liked. It's about developing the courage to be disliked. But here's the twist. That courage is where freedom lies. Freedom to live authentically, to step into your own truth without constantly looking over your shoulder to check if you're measuring up. Imagine waking up tomorrow, unapologetically yourself. What would that look like for you? The authors, drawing from the work of the renowned psychologist Alfred Adler, suggest that we shape our own lives through the goals we set. Our habits, emotions, even the way we react to others, all of it stems from the pursuit of our goals. We are, in essence, what we strive for. But when those goals are driven by the desire to gain approval, we're not living freely. We're simply responding to the expectations of others, acting out a script written by someone else. But freedom comes when you choose your own goals, goals that are not tied to what others think of you. Take a moment to consider. Are you living your life based on your own choices, or are you chasing the ever-moving target of approval? One of the central ideas in The Courage to be Disliked is that unhappiness is often a strategy. Sounds strange, doesn't it? But think about it. People who are chronically unhappy aren't unhappy because of their circumstances. They're unhappy because they've set goals that keep them trapped in dissatisfaction. A key reason for this: their relationships with others. Many of us have one primary goal in relationships: to be liked. We bend and stretch ourselves to fit others' molds, to meet their expectations, to gain their approval. But this constant striving for acceptance is not only exhausting, it's ultimately futile. You might think, but I need approval to feel good about myself. It's a belief so ingrained that it feels like a truth. But the authors challenge this. You don't need others' approval to be happy. The need for external validation only robs you of your freedom. It locks you into a cycle where you keep trying to meet someone else's yardstick, all while losing sight of your own goals, your own happiness. What's worse is that this cycle is often impossible to break, because the moment you begin to rely on others' approval, it's like trying to chase a shadow. You can never fully catch it. Instead, Kishimi and Koga argue that happiness is found in living for yourself. When you prioritize the freedom to live authentically over the constant pursuit of being liked, you open the door to genuine fulfillment. The key to happiness isn't a perfect life. It's an acceptance that your life, your choices, and your relationships are not about gaining others' approval, but about living with purpose and authenticity. And here's a profound thought. What if your unhappiness isn't caused by external events or people at all, but by your own pursuit of approval? What if the very thing you're seeking, validation, is what's keeping you from the peace you crave? As we explore further, we'll see how pursuing the goal of approval can turn relationships into transactions, places where you give to receive, not to contribute. Imagine throwing a surprise party for a friend, only to feel bitter because they didn't return the favor. The resentment you feel isn't about the party. It's about the fact that you were hoping for recognition in return. And when you don't get it, you feel slighted. This is the trap of validation. You give, but only in hopes of getting something back. And this robs your relationships of true connection. In contrast, when you shift your focus to helping others without the need for recognition, you break free from this cycle. You're no longer tethered to the need for approval. Your actions become genuinely altruistic because they are grounded in your desire to be of use, not to be seen as good. This shift in mindset is revolutionary. Imagine a life where your worth is no longer tied to the applause of others, where your relationships are not about what you can get, but about what you can give. The authors make a striking point here. True happiness doesn't require you to be extraordinary. You don't need to achieve something monumental to make a difference in the lives of others. Just by being present, by showing up authentically, you contribute. The irony is that when you stop trying to be perfect or seeking others' approval, you begin to experience life as it truly is, beautiful in its simplicity. So I leave you with this. Are you willing to embrace the courage to be disliked? Will you choose a life of freedom, or will you continue down the path of chasing validation that never truly satisfies? So let's talk about what this all means. Imagine you wake up tomorrow and suddenly, you don't care what anyone thinks. The weight of everyone else's opinions just evaporates. What would change in your life? How would you move through the world? You might think it's too radical, too impossible, but here's the kicker. This shift is not only possible, it's essential if you ever want to truly be happy. Kishimi and Koga emphasize something that hits hard. No one can be free while living for others. The act of seeking validation keeps you shackled, bound to a system of approval that will never end. The moment you stop caring about being liked, you step into a different dimension of life, a space where your decisions are rooted in what you believe, not what others expect. But the fear of being disliked, that's what trips most of us up, right? The idea that we must be liked to feel worthwhile is so ingrained in us, it feels almost like a biological instinct. But what if we flipped it? What if instead of chasing approval, we ran away from it? Imagine you walked into every room, not trying to fit in, but simply being yourself. The freedom that comes from that could change your entire life. Now, some might say this sounds selfish. In fact, it might even sound arrogant. But let's explore this deeper. People often think that being liked means being a good person. However, being good for others is not the same as being good to yourself. When your entire existence revolves around making others happy or seeking their approval, it's a fragile, precarious existence. You can never really know who you are if you're constantly shifting to mirror someone else's expectations. That's the trap. Let's use an example. Picture yourself at a party. Everyone is mingling, and you're standing in a corner, scanning the room. You see someone you want to impress, maybe a colleague, a friend, or a crush. What happens next? The voice in your head tells you to play it cool, be funny, be clever, maybe even a little mysterious. Why? To get their approval. You want them to like you, but have you noticed that, in the process, you forget who you really are? You stop being genuine just to fit into some mold you think they'll appreciate. Now imagine something different. You enter that same room, but this time, you don't care about impressing anyone. Instead, you just enjoy the party. You talk to people, not to win them over, but because you enjoy their company. That's when the magic happens. That's when real, authentic connections are made. And guess what? When you stop caring about others' judgments, you start to attract the kind of people who resonate with the real you. You stop playing a role, and you begin to live. But what happens if you don't adopt this mindset? If you keep living for approval? Well, we've all seen it. People stuck in the same repetitive loop, seeking validation from the wrong places. It becomes a never-ending chase, constantly adjusting, compromising, losing pieces of themselves to appease others. And in the end, what's left? An empty shell. You might be the most likable person in the room, but it's a performance, and no one can sustain a performance forever. But here's the truth. The biggest obstacle to your happiness is not failure. It's fear of failure. The fear that you're not good enough. The fear of being criticized. The fear of being disliked. This is the real enemy. It's the voice that tells you to shrink, to stay in the background, to avoid confrontation. It convinces you that if you don't meet someone's expectations, you'll lose their approval and therefore your value. It's important to realize that unhappiness is not a result of life's circumstances. It's a result of how you choose to interpret those circumstances. When you feel inadequate or rejected, it's not because you are inadequate or rejected, but because you've allowed your happiness to hinge on the approval of others. And here's the brutal truth. You're never going to please everyone. That's a fact. Someone will always find fault, criticize, or misunderstand you. But that's their problem, not yours. Now let's take a step further. The authors argue that we're all born with the capacity for happiness, but we squander it in the pursuit of approval. Happiness is not something that comes after you meet certain conditions or after you prove yourself worthy. It's not about checking boxes or receiving compliments. It's about realizing that you define your worth. Happiness is a result of deciding to live on your terms, not someone else's. If you're still doubting this, consider what you're really sacrificing by not letting go of the need for approval. You're sacrificing your authenticity, your peace of mind, and your freedom. Every time you compromise who you are to fit someone else's mold, you pay the price. It's not just an emotional toll, it's a spiritual one. So what would it look like if you started living according to your own standards? What if your worth was not determined by anyone else, but solely by how you choose to view yourself? And here's where we get to the core of it. The key to freedom is the courage to be disliked. Once you embrace this concept, everything changes. You start making decisions that are rooted in your own desires, not in others' expectations. You start to let go of the fear of judgment, and that's when real peace comes into your life. To live freely, to live authentically, is to accept that there are going to be people who don't like you. And guess what? That's okay, because the people who genuinely matter will respect you for who you are, not for who you pretend to be. They will celebrate your flaws, your quirks, and your uniqueness. And those are the people who make life worth living. I'll leave you with this. What would your life look like if you stopped trying to be liked by everyone? Imagine the weight that would lift from your shoulders. Imagine how you would start showing up differently in the world. Let that sink in. The freedom to live fully, authentically, and without fear of rejection is available to you today. The only thing standing in your way is your willingness to let go of the need for approval. So go ahead, take that leap. Start living your life for you and not for anyone else's applause. The world will be a much richer place when you do.